If I was to say name a dystopian movie, 9 times out of 10, you're either going to say The Hunger Games, Maze Runner, or Divergent. And if you said none of those, then well done, I guess. But did you say Interstellar? If you did, great movie. However, that will not come up again in this conversation. But the truth of the matter is, a good chunk of you would have said one of the 3 movies I mentioned. And if I said, can you name me a recent one? You either couldn't, or you would need a very hot minute to go through your Rolodex of information to find a movie that is recent and dystopian. So why is it we can think really quickly of 3 iconic dystopian movies back in the 2010s, but now we couldn't really think of one without having to rack our brain for one? Well, I think it comes down to the fact they just don't make them like they did in 2010. And in today's video, I want to talk about dystopian movies and why I think they just aren't a thing anymore. And to do that, we have to talk about the golden era of dystopian movies, that being, you guessed it, The Hunger Games, Divergent, and The Maze Runner, which all came out in roughly 2012. This was definitely the golden era, or era, depending how you say that, because I don't know myself, of these types of movies. The core year of these movies were 2012 to 2015, but I would like to make a note that other than 2017, there was a dystopian movie every single year through 2012 to 2018. And sometimes we had 2. I'm just going to quickly say them and roll them out, so I'm going to read it. So we had the first Hunger Games in 2012, Catching Fire, which is the second movie, in 2013, the third movie, Hunger Games Mockingjay Part 1, in 2014, Maze Runner 2014, Divergent 2014. 2014 was a very great year, if you like these movies. I mean, Jesus. What a back-to-back that year. We then had Insurgent in 2015, Hunger Games Mockingjay Part 2 2015, Maze Runner The Scorched Trials 2015, Allegiant, is that how I say it? 2016, and then Maze Runner The Death Cure 2018. Even reading these out now, I'm like, wow, what I would do to go back and live that in cinema, because I didn't. I actually only watched a couple of the Hunger Games in cinema, and the rest I all watched on DVD, and I might have watched the Maze Runner in cinema, but that was about it. But like I said, I did watch them all when they came on DVD, and maybe 2 years ago, I went through a really random phase of being obsessed with these 3 movies where I would only watch Divergent, Hunger Games, and The Maze Runner back to back to back to back for a solid few months. I do really want to emphasize that although these are movies, they do originate from books, particularly YA books, and I do think there is a trend with dystopian movies being based off books doing much more better than dystopian movies that are not based off books. And of course, it goes without saying that the movies and the books, they're not a 1-for-1, so I am only going to be speaking about the movies, not what happens in the books. And I honestly won't be speaking about a lot that happens in the movies. So yes, there are some spoilers, but if you haven't watched these by now, then I really don't know what to tell you. Before we can look into why dystopian movies aren't doing great nowadays, we have to look at why they did so great back then. So as I said, these core movies came from YA books, that is young adult if you didn't know what that meant. And young adult is roughly for the ages of 12 to 18. And all of these movies, they follow a very similar formula to each other, that being the main characters Tris, Katniss, and Thomas are all roughly 16. They're the only ones that can solve the problem. The adults are the evil ones, and it's up to them to start the wheels of everyone joining in and helping take down the bad guys. And just like the books that are aimed at young adult, the movies are also aimed at young adults, so majority teens. And I think when you're a teenager, you definitely get it into your head that the adults are the evil ones and us as teens are the right ones, and we know best and we know more. And I'm saying we're like I'm a teen, I'm not, I'm 26, but I'm speaking in the mind of me as a teen. You also have this sense of adventure that you want to have, but you can't have because you're a teenager. And these movies tap into that so well, where you feel like you are the main character and you're going through this adventure and you're solving these problems. And honestly, you didn't feel like you were watching the rebellion, you felt like you were the rebellion. And then after, you would leave the cinema feeling like you were powerful and that you personally could do something. And I think we can all agree that if you leave the movies feeling some sort of way, especially like this, it automatically becomes a good movie and you want to go back and see the rest of them when they come out. But as well as making you feel like you could do something, I would say these movies did play into a real fear of what teenagers had, as well as adults. And I'm going to include adults because Adults also loved these movies, especially The Hunger Games. Adults like this as well. And if you were a teenager not going with your friends, you were most likely going with an adult. But specifically as a teen, I feel like you kind of get lost in the sauce, trying to find your personality, seeing where you fit in, as well as trying to figure out who you are as a person. And then you go to the cinema and you watch a movie like Divergent, where people are put into factions and your life is predetermined for you. These stats show you what your life is and what you will become. The option of trying to figure yourself out is immediately taken away from you, and you don't get a chance to figure out who you are, and there's not even a discussion to be had. If you don't know the factions in Divergent, I am going to quickly just mention them because I love Divergent. And yes, I will most likely say these wrong, I do apologize, but we have Abnation, how do you even say that? That is selfless. Amity, which is peaceful. Candor, which is honest. Dauntless, which is brave. Erdwite? What even is that? That's intelligence. And finally, we have a secret option, which no one should get, which is Divergent. And in the movies, if you're Divergent, you're seen as automatically bad because your mind works differently. You can't be swayed into one direction. You are multifaceted and you think about things in all different angles. And because you can't be confined into one way of thinking, you're not just selfless, you're not just peaceful, you are a amalgamation of all things. It means you can't be controlled as easy as people who are set into a faction straight away. It is worth knowing in the movies, if you do have this, you are immediately just from existence. So it wasn't something you actually wanted because you weren't going to make it very far. And to be honest, after watching this movie, you're either like me, where you take the test online and it's super fun trying to figure out the faction you're in, but you just lied to get Dauntless because you only wanted to be Dauntless because 4 was in it. Or you took this in a more retrospective sense, more in depth than I did at that age, which is you saw the main character Trish trying her hardest to fit into one sector, but not being able to because she was Divergent. And I think a lot of teenagers liked this because it was, well, Trish was different and I can be different and that's okay. And I think humans as a collective, we don't necessarily just fit into one category. And I think a lot of people liked seeing this, the main character struggling to find out who she is while trying to force herself to be one type of way because people want her to be that, and realizing she's none of those things and she has to figure that out for herself. I think as a teenager, you definitely do view that, and that brings you a weird sense of comfort because, again, a lot of times as a teenager, you're struggling with your own identity, and then you watch a movie and you go, wow, even this icon is really struggling like we are. On top of that, I think from a young age, we do get drilled into us that the government is bad. And if you personally didn't at that time, then you were most likely going to the cinema with an adult who potentially could have thought, government equals bad. And what do all 3 of these movies have? A very bad government or the equivalent of their own government. For this, we're going to specifically look at the Hunger Games, in which you have 12 districts in which you're very poor and food is very scarce, and if you want more food, you need to put your name into the equivalent of a hat. And if it gets ruled out, then you enter the Hunger Games. And if not, you get an extra bit of food for even putting your name down. But if you do get picked from the hat and you do enter the games, this isn't just a normal game. This is a game where you fight other opponents from the district. And the end result is everyone is, except from one standing player. And if you win the games, then you're now treated as the upper elite. You've earned the right to be treated like a human, despite doing very unhuman things to get that. And it's because of the upper class, which is the government, and the capital, which is the rich class, that these games even occur, because they want entertainment, and this is entertainment. And while the upper class watches this for fun, the lower class, the district class, they do this for pure survival and the pure necessity of needing food because they'll starve. But then on the flip side, you have the capital and the government who have so much food, they just waste it instead of giving it to the districts. And in the games, you get stripped down to your basic survival instincts, which is become predator so you don't become prey. Really, the whole movie is a movie about classism and poverty and rich versus poor. The whole movie really does go into a lot of things, and the overarching theme is the government is very bad and Katniss needs to take down the government and the capital, the rich who are doing this to people who were not blessed enough to be just birthed into money. And yes, I guess you could say, well, as a teenager, I wasn't really thinking like that. I just thought this is a crazy movie. But now we're grown up, we could definitely say, oh, there is that, yeah. And if you were going with an adult would have made that link. And like I said earlier, there is probably maybe a parent going with you. And I want to reinstate that these movies definitely had a massive appeal to adults as well, not just teenagers. On top of that, you had the chosen one fantasy. You had Katniss, who was the one who was chosen by the people to stand up and fight against the Capitol and the government. She became their beacon of hope. In The Maze Runner, despite Mina running the maze every single day, making a whole map of the maze, he couldn't figure out how to get out of the maze. But Thomas comes along, and Thomas is the only one who can figure the way out the maze for everyone. And lastly, we had Triss, who was biologically built different to others. She was destined by her brain to become the chosen one. And as an audience, we saw her as the only one who could stand up against the government, because she was the only one that we were seeing who possessed this. And for all of them, they didn't feel like they fit in. They were the outcast, the anomaly. For Katniss, she was never destined to be the hero. She was just a volunteer to save her sister from the games. Then we have Triss, who just breaks the system purely by existing. And finally, oh my god, look at my handshake. Are you seeing that? Woo! And finally, we have Thomas that shows up with no memory. People don't really like him. He's the only one who wants to do this in the maze, and somehow he is the key to everything. They were never chosen because they fitted the perfect mold. They were chosen because they were different and they acted different to other people. And again, as a teenager, you definitely feel like, I don't fit in here. Why do I feel so different to everyone else? Why is everyone doing life easier than I am? And then you see these people on the screen who are different, and they're the hero of the story. They're the ones people look up to. People rely on them. And in turn, it makes you feel special, and it makes you feel like you could be more. You leave the cinema thinking there's more to this. And whether you like these movies or not, there is no denying that these films in particular filled a massive hole that was left over from Twilight and Harry Potter. Twilight came out in cinemas in 2009 and wrapped up in 2012. This marked the end of a multi-year fandom war of Edward versus Jacob, vampires versus werewolves, as well as spending years waiting for the ending that you wanted to happen, whether it was Edward or Jacob, and how would everything be resolved. And then we had Harry Potter, which hit cinemas in 2001 and wrapped up in 2011. To say a whole generation grew up on this and made it their whole personality is an understatement. You had the excitement of midnight releases with the later movies, and on top of that, you had people taking quizzes to figure out what house they were, as well as finding out which one you would have. Oh, if I joined this house, maybe I'd be friends with that person. What would my Patronus be? Patronus? What would my Patronus be? How does this movie wrap up? How does this link here? This was a fandom which really reached new heights, and no one can dispute that with Harry Potter, and I would say the same with Twilight. And especially with Harry Potter, we watched children become adults through these movies, and that was something that was just crazy at the time when you think about it. And then just like that, within a year apart, both of these mega franchises came to an end. And then there was nothing else to look forward to that had the same fandom level and excitement as these two things did. There was no more excitement for the next movie, no more debating with people online or in person, and there was just no more community. And what do people yearn for? Fandom. They yearn for fandom. We all collectively want to get excited for the next movie. Pick our favourite characters, pick a side, as well as dissecting the movie and trying to figure out what's going to happen here, how will this end? And with there being a void, guess who came and filled that in 2012? That's right, Hunger Games, which then led to the multi-year dystopian movie Golden Era. As well as filling the void left behind from Twilight and Harry Potter, what else did these movies have, you ask? A romance subplot. I mean, we only have to look at Twilight to see that if you do a romance plot in a movie well, it does wonders for audience retention for the next movie. Even when looking at Harry Potter, and the romance is a very small aspect of the movies. I think I just winked at you then, I'm so sorry. You'd still know the name Cho Chang, and you'd still hope that Ginny ended up with Harry by the end of the movies. And now we had 3 major movies happening with romance in it, which if you were interested in that, you could get excited for it. And if you didn't, well, there was still an excellent storyline happening at the same time. For the Hunger Games, we had a little bit of a love triangle with Gail and Peter. And the romance in this worked really well because it really played into the survival aspect of the movies. The relationship between Katniss and Peter, it wasn't just emotional, it became very strategic. It got to the point where it was part of the game and it was the only way that they could survive. And at the end, it was they would rather both not make out of the games because they wouldn't want to live if the other one couldn't live with them.
If you die, and I live, I'd have nothing. Nobody else that I care about.
And the lines became very blurred, especially to the audience, of what was them really feeling that, and what was them doing that because they wanted to survive the games? You were definitely questioning their motives, but because of that, you were hooked into seeing what was going to happen next. And then alongside of that, we have Gale and Katniss. Gale was a very close friend with Katniss. He helped her hunt and made sure her family was safe and sound while she was in the games. And now it's not only will Katniss survive the games, it's who will Katniss pick? Her best friend that helped her stay alive before the games, as well as her family while in the games, or Peeta, who she was going to give her life up for. In Divergent, we had the connection between Triss and Four, and this little relationship felt like the only true, honest thing in the movies. It felt very safe in a world that was very manufactured, in a world where everything was predetermined and you had your future set out for you. We were able to root for Triss and Four as entities that were not necessarily conforming to what they had to conform to. And I think we can all agree that we all had the biggest, fattest crush on Four, and that one scene where he's throwing the blades and like skims her ear. Oh my God, that is my favorite scene in any movie. I will say the romance does play quite a big thing in Divergent, and I know I've just briefly mentioned on it, but I couldn't really dive more into why it was so important other than the fact it just gives more stability and fun in the world, in a world where it sucks. And then lastly, we have The Maze Runner. Out of the previous two movies, this one definitely put romance at the very, very, very back of the plot line. And although it was more subtle, I feel like this is exactly why it worked so well. The whole world is very chaotic, it's very confusing, and everyone is running, and those very small snippets of romance just gives us, the audience, something to hold on to and root for in a world where, again, everyone is running and everything is dangerous and there's spider robots trying to get everyone. So if these movies had everything we wanted, they filled this void, they had the romance, they had the great plot line, how did it all go wrong? Where did it all hit its downfall? Well, I don't think the genre just had a wipeout overnight. I think the genre more collapsed in on itself and then ceased to be there. There's definitely a few key reasons for this. I think one of them would be the Trump effect, where everything that felt dystopian was now feeling very real life when Trump was coming into power, especially in America. Although across the globe that might not hit as hard for us, we could all find some sort of relevance and correlation between our own governments and the movies, that now these movies didn't feel like this is an escape. This felt like, oh, this is tying too much into real life. I don't want to be here no more. As well as that, they definitely felt to innovate, especially for cinema. Again, like I said in the beginning, they definitely followed very key lines of, they're a teenager, there's these bad governments and they have to solve the problem, everyone might die, And after a while, I think people were getting that fatigue of, okay, we understand this, and now we can guess the whole plotline of this movie, so I guess we don't need another one. As well as that, the costs to make these movies are extraordinarily high, especially for when they started coming out. And with the audience started to drop off, it became hard for these big companies to keep pumping money into movies without the guarantee of the return and more. For the production budget, most of these movies had about 80 million to 125 million plus. And that was just for filming because of the CGI and the large sets. And then when we look at the marketing side, if a movie roughly costs 100 million to make, they roughly spend between 50 to 100 million on the marketing on top of that. So just for this movie to break even, we need like 250 to 300 million. That's about then how much profit the companies want to make on top of that. And the Allegiant effect was definitely a major warning to studios to stop doing dystopian movies. And if you don't know what Allegiant is, it is the third movie in the Divergent series. So just for a bit of context, the first movie, Divergent, it made 288 million. The second movie, Insurgent, made 297 million. The third one, Allegiant, made 179 million. And considering the second movie was the most profitable, you'd think the third movie would then go up as well. And it took a massive plummet in revenue. And you have to remember, the studio was going to take this as a massive failure. This movie, I think, cost roughly 110 million to make without the marketing. So overall, this movie was seen as a financial disaster. And a lot of studios saw that and thought, oh, we don't want to actually spend all that money and not make more money back. So let's just put that on the bookshelf and maybe just never return to that. And I will say, we never actually got a fourth movie in the Insurgent series. The third one leaves on a cliffhanger and you never find out what happens. But if you want to know, I'm going to tell you right now because I am that person. If they made a fourth movie, just know you wouldn't like it. And I'm actually going to be nice. I've decided and not spoil it for you. But if you want to Google what happens to Triss, Google it. Just Google it. Why I won't read the books. But moving on from Triss and the failure on the third movie of the Divergent series, Marvel movies were becoming a massive thing. We had Iron Man that came out in 2008, and then slowly more and more people were wanting to watch Marvel movies and superhero movies, DC movies, over dystopian movies. In 2012, we had The Avengers, then we had Age of Ultron in 2015, Iron Man was 2013, and Black Panther was 2018. So you had these really, really hyped up and popular Marvel movies coming out alongside these dystopian movies. And they were in a little bit of a battle, and Marvel was starting to win this battle, and studios were realizing that they could put money into superhero movies and they'd make a profit. Big time. And Maze Runner: The Death Cure, which came out in 2018, really marked the end of the golden era of dystopian movies. We then had Avengers: Infinity War and the lead up to Avengers: Endgame in 2019. And no one can deny how impactful those movies were. And there was really no question on why superhero movies were becoming such a popular thing within audiences. And I will say there's always room for everything to exist. There's room for superhero movies, action movies, horror movies, dystopian movies, but there can only be a certain amount of money that movies are willing to put into these movies. And if they don't see the return, they just won't do them again. And dystopian movies weren't making the return, especially when comparing them to superhero movies. I do want to make a note that there was a Hunger Games movie that came out, which was a prequel called The Ballad of, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. It came out in 2023, and there is no reason for the name to be that long. But anyway, it did extremely well, but I do want to make the argument that personally, I don't think it did well because it was a dystopian movie. I think it did well because it was in the Hunger Games universe and it was a prequel to the original movie, and that's why it did so well. Along with this, there are some dystopian TV shows that are doing incredibly well. You have Stranger Things and The Last of Us. They've both done really, really well. But I'm not going to jump into those because I think that could be a whole separate movie on dystopian TV shows. So in conclusion, I want more dystopian movies. I yearn for them. But unfortunately, there will never be another golden era, and we must find solace in what we had and just hope that maybe one day we will have at least one more good dystopian movie series that happens.